We'll still wait for 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, maybe we can start the meeting. So, distinguished panelists, dear colleagues, dear friends, on behalf of UNIFE, the European Rail Association of the Rail Supply Industry, feel warmly welcome to this event. We are delighted to have all of you here today with us. I'm Philippe Citroën, Director General of UNIFE, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator today. The train has departed and we are getting into full speed with for this important European Year of Rail 2021. With this webinar on how to boost rail investments with the support of the MFF and the Recovery and Resilience Facility, UNIFE is starting a series of monthly events that we will organize in the context of the European Year of Rail to address key topics for the future of our industry, be it on sustainability, digitalization, skills, or ERTMS. The rail ecosystem has been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The rail supply industry is looking at an uncertain future due to the financial losses sustained by customers, the operators, and the infrastructure managers. And while rail manufacturers have been doing their best to maintain production capacities and to deliver despite lockdowns and quarantine measures, we must now insist on the need to avoid a potential market contraction, which would have devastating effect on the industry, including on the numerous SMEs who play an essential role in our supply chains. The good news is that this scenario can still be avoided if the EU and member states decide to implement massive public investment plans for rail. The recent agreement at EU level on both the MFF and the recovery package gives us hope in this respect, and we also have been very interested by the presentation made by Vice President Timmermans and Madame Valéan on the sustainable and smart mobility strategy, which is very important for the rail sectors. To discuss these major topics with us today, let me please introduce the important panelists who have accepted our invitation. We have first Mr. Dominique Riquet, Member of European Parliament, co-chair of the European Parliament's Intergroup on the Sustainable and Long-Term Investment, who is, as you know, always been very supportive of the rail sector and is extremely busy in the European Parliament. Bonjour, Monsieur Riquet. Then we have Mr. Herald Reuters, Director for Investment, Innovative and Sustainable Transport in DG Move. You all know him and he's also on the front line on all those funding topics. Mr. Peter Berkowitz, Head of Unit for Smart and Sustainable Growth from DG Regio. Mr. Frederico Francisco, Advisor to the Minister for Infrastructure and Housing from the Portuguese Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing. And as you know, yesterday there was a very important session in a Tran committee of the Parliament for the presentation of the Portuguese presidency program by Mr. Pedro Nuno Santos. So I'm sure that Frederico will tell us more about the declaration made, a very positive declaration made by his minister during the session in the Tran committee. Then we have Matteo Mussini, who is a Senior Advisor Strategy and Process Management at CR. And we will finish the presentation by the UNIFE representative, Mr. Marc Robert Sontag, who is the Executive Director of Mobility Finance at Siemens Mobility. So thank you all again for your availability. It's a real honor to have you with us today. We will start with, let's say, 5 to 7 minutes intervention from all the speakers. You can start asking the questions through the Q&A open session, which is now open, and I will, of course, we'll look at the question, and we'll, after the presentation made by the speakers, there will be a Q&A session, and so please ask your questions, and we'll make a selection. And for the rest, I just wanted to say that we can start, and with the speakers. I would like to thank him again. So let's start first with Mr. Riquet. Mr. Riquet, thank you again for being here. We know that you are extremely busy, but the floor is yours, and thank you very much for participating in this webinar. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Strand. Good day, everybody. I'm delighted to once again come and talk about rail with such interesting panel. 2021 being the year of the rail, as you said previously, Mr. Citroën, I'm sure that is the first of many occasions to meet ourselves. It's necessary to recall all the strengths of the mode, of the rail mode. It's the most environmentally compatible mode. It's also a social mode of transport as well as an affordable one. It so happens that Europe is also the world industrial champion, and I think it's very important for us. Europe has been aware of this potential for quite a long time. With 217,000 kilometers of active railway, we have historically based our competitiveness on an efficient infrastructure network. However, the results reached so far regarding the modal shift policy launched by the European Commission 30 years ago have been far from our expectations, both for passenger and freight transport. Our rail network is aging, and it's of paramount importance that we manage to refresh it if we want to reach a 30% modal share for rail freight by 2030, for instance. Of course, we have tools. They are built to support infrastructure projects through investment with different goals and characteristics. Three main tools may make available financial support project implementing the TNT, Connecting Europe Facility, European Fund for Strategic Investment, and Horizon 2020, the usual suspect as we see. Among those, the Connecting Europe facility is a specific multi-annual financial program for investment in transport and also energy and digital. For transport, with nearly 24 billion invested for the period since 2014, it's a vector of connectivity, territorial cohesion, growth, and employment. The ongoing negotiations with the Council on the CF2 are a little bit difficult at the moment, but it's capital that we reach as soon as possible an ambitious deal on this instrument. The sector is waiting for us, I think. I want to stress that investing in infrastructure is not only a favor we do to ourselves for the future. Indeed, for every GDP % we invest in infrastructure, we get at least 1.5 cents GDP over the next 4 years. It's not only due to the amount of funding for the Union is able to raise, but also to how the CF is administered and directed. Indeed, I think it's very important. The fund is centrally managed and the projects are selected with criterion of community-wide added value, and I think it's very important. In reason of its management, the first CF already demonstrated that it is the most efficient funding tool we have at our disposal. Then, this will be a pillar of the recovery following the deep crisis we are living, but also the foundation of the competitiveness we want to strengthen and build for the aftermath. We do not treat lightly with it. Then, in a less common way in European policies, there is an incredible opportunity embodied by the Recovery and Resilience Facility. 750 billion euro to be spent until 2023 in order to revive the European economy. For sure, RAI can benefit from it. It's very clear from the national recovery plans, which are significantly financed by the ERFF. In France, for example, the RAI sector will get for around 5 billion euro, and in Germany is the same too. The regulation of the ERFF guarantees that there are in the focus of a green recovery in the national plans, which have to follow different guidelines. 37% of the spending, for instance, have to contribute to our climate neutrality objective. If the criteria set by the co-legislator are respected, the plans are validated and the payments can start. This whole process is very beneficial for rail, which fulfills goals of economic recovery, social inclusions, and decarbonization in general and transport in particular. So, how can we boost investments with the support of the MFF and the RFF? I would say that we, at the European level, have the right method. The stake is no, not to deviate from it. This is what the financial regulation are for, and to work towards the increase and the massification of these investments. Thank you again for invitation, and I now leave the floor for the other panelists. Dear Philippe.
Thank you very much, Cher Dominique. Could I just ask one question to you before I give the floor to the panelists? It's about what are your expectations regarding the upcoming revision of the 10T guidelines? Do you think that this will have a big consequence? Because the 10T's policy is, of course, at the heart of the investment policy for the rail sector.
Very shortly, I think that for the negotiation about the TNT, which are beginning now, which is our initiative report, I think that the most important one for us is to finish the central network, I think. And so we will avoid to extend the field of the TNT. for example, to incoming not in the core network, the perfect network. And I think we have to focus on the main about the central network, about transborder, about missing links, and the three goals for us. Also, besides that, to struggle for a little more bit investments and more bit funding about that. But I think that we want to finish, if possible, it will be very difficult, but to finish the core network for 2030 and not to avoid to disperse ourselves in the periphery and other field of that. So I think that we have to be concentrated about the main goal and also with the transborder, and probably also to use a smart TNT revision, which is probably a very important tool to go forwards.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Riquet. Merci, Dominique. So now we ask Gerhard Reuters, who is the Director for Investment, Innovative and Sustainable Transport, who is certainly at the heart of those negotiations and who is in close contact with Dominique Riquet on a lot of files. So Gerhard, the floor is yours, and thank you again for spending time with us on this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Citroën, and thank you for the invitation. And it's really an honor to be present here at this seminar. And I thank Dominique Riquet for his words and his opening speech. Indeed, at this moment in time, we are right at the heart of the negotiations. And I fully concur with the prioritization and also the focus that the Parliament is putting at this moment, which is, I hope, conducive to results very soon. But we will see each other in trilogues again with the Portuguese presidency, who is speaking later in this event, and we are looking forward to that. I would like to concentrate on 2 points, dear auditors or dear webinar participants here. One is policy and the other one is on money, on financing. On the policy side, I think that the picture is really clear. We have, since the Paris Agreement, a clearly set goal under the lead of Ursula von der Leyen with the Green Deal. And it has been followed up by a climate target plan in September, and a sustainable and smart mobility strategy in December. And that strategy foresees, in sync with the Green Deal, a number of important milestones, like, for instance, doubling or tripling high-speed rail traffic by 2030 and 2050 respectively, or doubling rail freight by 2050. So I think we have a very big task ahead of us. And clearly, rail is going to be in the center, and even more so in this European Year of Rail, because you are hinting to it already, Mr. Citroën. There will be a TEN-T revision coming in September, and as indicated by Mr. Riquet, there is an excellent own initiative report from the Parliament already, which the auditors to this webinar can certainly find and see, which the Commission has been greeting. And it is, I think, highlighting already where to go. As Mr. Riquet said, we should not dilute. My personal opinion is that we should strengthen. So we should really focus where we are going in this revision by making sure that we can achieve the 2030 deadline. And possibly we will also reinforce the way to go from 2030 to 2050. Which is the comprehensive network. So we should not be, let's say, sidetracked by all kind of demands. We should continue to invest into the projects of the core network. And you know, Mr. Citroën, that around 70% of the current Connecting Europe facility is going to rail. And we have fantastic projects that would help to make a real internal market. Because for today, if you would like to use high speed across the member states, then it's very difficult. You have fantastic networks, perhaps in Spain or in France and Italy. You have the Benelux network connecting also to Germany and so on. But we have gaps across the borders still existing. And if we do not build projects like the Fehmarn, like Brenner, like Lyon-Turin, like Rail Baltica, we remain a scattered continent. And so it's very clear that we should focus on that. And the 10T revision will also bring even more unity. You have seen in the mobility strategy that we are going to merge together the rail freight corridors and the core network corridors in order to bring more unity. So also Unife and all the other rail partners will certainly be with us in the process leading up to the Commission proposal, and also afterwards in negotiating and convincing the member states to do so. That's on policy. On financing, that's the debate, of course. Mr. Riquet has been speaking about the CEF, so I do not need to add a lot there, but I would like to reassure you that the investments will continue also in a big proportion to go to rail. And that's very simple, because we have a climate earmarking or tracking, or whatever you want to call it, of 60%. And in the transport component of CEF, even we go up to 80%. And if you look in the important debates and dialogues ongoing on taxonomy, then you will find that rail is defined in most of its components at 100%, which is absolutely crucial for the future. So it is obvious that the Connecting Europe facility will, as also Mr. Riquet stresses, will be focused on the priorities we have already today, but will also be forced to even intensify that. And one in particular that I really think is absolutely important if we want to realize the milestones of the strategy and of the Green Deal is the digitalization of rail with ERTMS, and also with the systems that can allow to digitalize further, like automatic coupling, like timetabling, like all these that really need to be focused on increasing capacity also where we can on existing infrastructure by making better services available with higher frequencies, with longer trains, with automatic coupling and support. So that is an important component that we need to pursue. Now, the CEF alone will not make it. We also have to look at the other sources. I know that Peter Berkowitz is going to say a word on ESIF. I will not do that. There will be InvestEU with a sustainable infrastructure window. Please do not forget it for rail rolling stock. Please come in there as well on the InvestEU. There is also the Horizon Europe with the Shift to Rail partnership, which will grow from 450 to 600 million. So that is important as well to develop the digitalization of rail in particular. And then there is the RRF. Member states shall be encouraged to put also money on these big projects. And so far as the Commission can see, this may not be sufficiently the case, because for now we have some member states which do and others which do not in their draft resilience and recovery or recovery and resilience plans. So we need to convince to concur also the member states on their 750 billion, as Mr. Riquet said, to put that also on this transport dimension, and to also do it cross-border. I mean, these national plans should not be just there for national purposes, which are not in the European spirit. So we want to see also the cross-border projects that I mentioned to be really recognized into the RRPs of the member states. Only in that way we can make it, Mr. Citroën. I hope that we can convince everyone that all the 4 or 5 sources and instruments are used, because the investments are really, really very big, and we should plug everything we can in order to make progress. That will be my key message for this European Year of Rail starting event. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reuters. I think the message you pass are extremely important, and it shows that all the rail stakeholders must be very active in their lobbying activities with the member states. I am also confident that a big part of the budget of CEF will go to the rail sector, but that's also an important thing that we have to follow closely. There's just one question concerning the recovery plans of the member states. I know that there's been the Secretary General has a task force working on it. I suppose that DG Move is looking very carefully at the proposals made by the member states and checking if there are rail projects in those programs presented by the member states.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Citroën, for sure. All the Commission services are working together in the task force to screen, and afterwards, of course, to approve and to turn it into implementing decisions. It's not easy because also for the member states, let's say the timing is very short, and they have a lot of I would say work to pull into these plans. But the Commission is available and has also made guidance available to the member states, and so we are looking forward that these plans could be yielding good results. But I have to admit that I'm still concerned that member states will first be in time, secondly will be working across borders and European-minded, and that they also take into account those areas that are important to the Green Deal, like energy, industry, but also transport.
Okay, thank you very much for those very important information and messages you passed to us. Thank you for being here. So now we can ask Mr. Peter Berkowitz, who is Head of Unit for Smart and Sustainable Growth from DG Regio. You have already mentioned, Mr. Reuters, you have said that there are all other possibilities of funding a project, so it would be interesting to have the views on DG Regio on all those specific points related to rail. So thank you, Mr. Berkowitz, for being here. And I know that you have a slide, so maybe we could put the slides on the screen, if you could do that, Arthur, and then we give the floor to Mr. Berkowitz, and that we thank again for being with us.
Right, well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and follow two such distinguished speakers in this area of policy. And I want to follow Harold a little bit in talking about policy and talking about funding. Now, our policy is about cohesion, and it's about helping primarily the rest of parts of Europe catch up. And I think that the main message I would like to pass today is that we see railway and rail investments as a very much an important dimension of what we're going to do, and hitting not only cohesion policy objectives, but of course, as mentioned before, the Green Deal. So I mean, perhaps if I could have the first slide. Now, I mean, our framework for the next period is built around 5 main policy objectives. And the main 2 objectives which touch rail are the policy objective 3, which is a more connected Europe by enhancing mobility. So, I mean, this is all about connectivity, and this is where the main part of our railway and rail investments will take place. But we also have an objective linked to broader green and low carbon transition, in which urban mobility plays a particular role. And you know, here we have light rail, metros, and trams. Now, just to give you a sense of what we're doing in the current period, our total investment on these 2 areas in relation to rail and related mobility investment is around 30 billion euros, probably around 18 billion euros for Europe, for railways, and 13 billion for rail-based urban mobility or track-based urban mobility. And I think, you know, our view is that there is potential to go further in the next period, the period from 21 to 27, both because, as I said before, we see rail as an area of investment hitting a number of different important objectives for us. but also because I think the framework for investment in rail has been simplified in the next period. So if I could have the next slide. So just to say that the kind of things we can do, I mean, we can, under the sustainable urban mobility aspect, we can invest in infrastructure and rolling stock. And here we're essentially talking about light railway, tram and metros. In relation to our main mobility objective under PO3, the investment there is in all types of railways, 10T, but also national, regional, and local, digitalization of transport, and rolling stock. And I just wanted to highlight, I'll come back to it in a second, that the digitalization of transport, ERTMS, and rolling stock has been quite complicated in the current period. It will be much simpler in the future. Then in addition, as Harold mentioned, there will be other, let's say, more broad support measures to things like research and innovation, digitalization, and investments linked to improving skills and SMEs linked to the rail sector. So there's a very, very broad package of support available. And I think from our perspective, what is important is that these things are brought together in a coherent manner, which works for regions and member states. Now, two important points which were clarified by the co-legislator is that there will be very little support to fossil fuels, and that maintenance and operating costs are not eligible, because we're an investment policy. But I think these clarifications are very, very useful in establishing an investment framework which takes us through the 2030 targets to 2050, because that as well is something which is very important for us, is that we want to have future forward-looking investments which avoid the risks of lock-in to technologies which are sustainable in the longer term. If I could have the next slide. Now, I think in terms of policy, I mentioned this at the start. You know, there are three interlinked objectives, and this is going to be our discussion with member states about the content. And one of the reasons I said that we see the scope to have more investment in the area of rail is perhaps the last point, the cleaning of transport, is that we see a considerable scope, particularly in our eastern and southeastern member states, where most of our resources are, to shift freight to rail and to focus on more sustainable modes of transport. And this is essentially moving away from road. I mean, it's very simple, where we also have large investments. So there's a big push for modal shift. And of course, we need to support sustainability and digital transitions and support the objectives that are the policy framework that were discussed by the first two speakers is in place to do it. So really this shift to sustainable and smart mobility. Now, if I could move on to the last slide. Now, just, you know, we know, I think, what the direction of travel is. And from our perspective, you know, what we see, the main blockage to this is not technical capacity, it's not the capacity of the sector to make the necessary investments, but essentially it's a question of planning and coherent implementation, both through the private sector, but also through the regulatory frameworks and the frameworks put in place by national and regional administrations. And therefore we have an obligation for policy objective 3, and this is very closely linked to work on 10, is for a comprehensive national and regional transport plan, which will ensure that what we do is closely integrated with the various policy frameworks that have been developed at European and national level, whether it's about the network corridor work plans, the frameworks for alternative fuels infrastructure, the road safety plans, or the ERTMS deployment plans. Because we need not only to invest, but we have to invest well. Unfortunately, we do not have an obligation for a transport plan for policy objective 2 in relation to sustainable urban mobility. However, here we recommend very, very strongly that the sustainable urban mobility plans are developed and used for our investments. And then finally, of course, we have the state aid rules in relation to rolling stock and public service obligations. So, I mean, what I hope you come away with from my presentation, my very brief presentation today, is the sense that there is a tremendous opportunity here. There is a tremendous opportunity to make use of cohesion policy funding to accelerate investment in the rail sector. And this is the discussion that we will be having with member states and regions, and it will be very helpful if you can pass these messages as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very important presentation. I noted that on your side you highlighted the importance of digitalization and the deployment of Artemis, which is also important, and you mentioned on many occasions the shift to rail. There's just one question on my side. You concerning the new Just Transition Fund. Could you say a few words about it, because it would be interesting to see which investments possibilities are there for the rail sector? Could you say a few words about this?
Thank you. It's a very important question you raised, and the Just Transition Fund is part of the Just Transition mechanism, and there is a fund which has 17.5 billion euros. There is a second pillar which is funded essentially out of Invest EU, and then there's a third pillar which is essentially supporting public authorities to make investments. Now, in relation to the Just Transition Fund, it is, compared to cohesion policy and compared to the RRF, a very small amount of money. I mean, it's we're talking about 5% of cohesion policy and perhaps 2% of the RRF, and therefore the resources will be very much focused on the needs of the communities which are most affected by the transition and the closure of fossil fuel activities. So although there is a possibility under the Just Transition Fund to support essentially sustainable mobility, sustainable local mobility, the focus will be very much on how this will support the communities undergoing restructuring. So we don't see, while we see there is a possibility there, we don't see there as a major source of funding. I think we see that already. I mean, the 30 billion that I highlighted in our mainstream programs is a bigger source. But there is, and I just wanted to finish with this, that there are the second pillars, which are Invest EU and the public sector loan facility, where there is more flexibility. Okay. So I would say if you're interested in resources, there it's better to go to the two other pillars.
Okay, thank you very much for this clarification, and thank you very much for your presentation. So we see that a lot of things will happen on the side of the DG Regio, and have to be in close contact with you. So thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Frederico Franciscos, who is advisor to the Minister for Infrastructure and Housing in the Portuguese Ministry of Infrastructure. So it's important to have the views now of the country who is in charge of the presidency of the EU, and we look with great interest at the declaration made by the minister in the Trump committee. So, Federico, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Citroën, and I'd like to thank you and thank UNIF for this invitation. For me, it's a privilege to be amongst such a distinguished panel with my colleagues. First of all, you have heard the declaration of the minister, and in other declarations that the Portuguese presidency has made, we have said that within transport policy, the railways will be unequivocally our priority for this semester. Not only is this the first half of the European Year of Rail, which is a very happy coincidence for us, but we intend to make the most of it and try to launch and to make a broad debate about the railway sector in Europe, including passenger transport, the discussion about international passenger transport, including the discussion about freight transport, and including the discussion about the the social and the institutional and cultural aspects of the sector overall. So there have been a number of initiatives in the last few months about some of these topics. So I think it is the right opportunity to bring them all together into a broad discussion on the sector. Now, electing railways as a priority of our presidency. It's not, if you look deeper, it's not hard to say that Portugal is not exactly in a very comfortable position about investment in the railways. So for the past 2 or 3 decades, we have invested mostly in road and not so much in the railways. And specifically in the last 10 years, in the last 10, 15 years, we have had a number of hesitations about building or not building high-speed rail, building or not building cross-border networks. These have all become very controversial topics in the country, and so this is some of the difficulty that we have faced. And I know this is not unique to Portugal. So many other countries face similar difficulties when trying to make such huge investments. To put this into context. So, especially the last 10 years, we need to realize that the overall investment levels, public investment levels across Europe are still well below what they were 10 years ago. So I've looked into a paper from an Austrian economist that he computes the net public investment, that is the public investment with the depreciation subtracted. And the current net public investment across the euro area is still close to zero. So the amount of public investment being made right now is barely enough to offset the depreciation of public assets. So this is true overall, and it is probably true in many cases for the railway networks, for the rail networks. So the first challenge that we face, and we face it even harder in Portugal because we have all the problems we had all the problems with our deficits. We have very strict fiscal rules that we have to follow in order to bring our public debt into the guidelines of the Growth and Stability Pact. So it is very, very hard to make large increases into our public investment budgets, and from what the numbers look like, it's probably the same at different levels across Europe. So to add to that problem, here in Portugal we have a shortage of available projects ready to put into the ground, ready to go to construction. So this is to say that putting all these factors together, right now in Portugal, most of the public investment being made, and certainly almost all of the public investment being made in the rail network, is financed by some European mechanism, either by CEF or by the multi-year financial framework. So I give Portugal as an example. Of course, other countries will not face the same difficulties that we face, but there is a need for more public investment across Europe, and that is unequivocal. Some countries will be more dependent on the European instruments than others. So now we have the Recovery and Resilience Program, and this is another aspect where Portugal is not in the most comfortable position for this discussion, because if we look into our proposal for the Recovery and Resilience Program, there is no investment in rail in our Recovery and Resilience Program. And why does this happen? So first of all, we have this difficulty that I have already mentioned. We have very few projects that are ready to put into to launch into the ground, and given the very short time frame for the investments in the Recovery and Resilience Program, we have realized that with the current public procurement rules, we would have a great difficulty in actually realizing these projects in time for the 2026 deadline. So instead, we have chosen to use this program to finance urban mobility and housing projects and other kind of projects that on the one hand would be easier to complete within the deadline, and or on the other hand that we would not be able to finance otherwise. So we have put the bulk of our rail investment for the next cycle, and it's a very ambitious plan that I can comment later, on the multi-year financial framework and on what we expect are the funds that we can get from the CEF. To add to this, there is the question of the taxonomy rules and other rules that up until now have privileged urban mobility over railway projects. For example, if we are going to upgrade the railway line, up until now it doesn't count the 100% towards the climate and the environmental goals. I believe the latest proposals from the Commission already tried to balance this and to put the railways on level with urban transport. But up until now, these are the rules we have been working with. And so the last ingredient, I believe, should be introduced into this discussion are the EU policy instruments. So the latest we have is the Smart and Sustainable Mobility Strategy that has the ambitious goals that Herald Reuters already mentioned of doubling rail freight transport and tripling high-speed rail passenger transport until 2050. We need to realize, and if we start looking into this into more detail, we start realizing that these are indeed very ambitious goals. For example, I have no doubt that if we want to double the rail freight transport until 2050, we'll need to build hundreds of kilometers of new rail lines across Europe. The same for tripling the high-speed rail line. Okay. But if we compare these goals with the goals that were on the 2011 white paper on transport, we see that although they are ambitious, they are much less ambitious than they were before. In the 2011 white paper, we were talking about shifting half of the road freight transport to rail. So this would mean a 5 to 10-fold increase in rail freight transport from the 2011 goals. So it's sometimes easy to put very ambitious goals into paper, but not so easy to actually realize them. In any case, I would say the overall conclusions is if we want to get even close to any of these goals, even the latest goals from the sustainable mobility, smart and sustainable mobility strategy, we will need a huge increase in the public investment on the rail networks, and we will need to take steps to make sure that the distribution of this investment across Europe does not accentuate the asymmetries in coverage and density of the rail network that already exists. And this is why I gave the example of Portugal. We are a peripheral country. We are a somewhat poorer country in relation to the European average. We have our capacity for public investment is much lower than other countries in Europe. So we are much more dependent on these instruments to actually be able to realize these investment goals and these modal shift goals that are inscribed into the policy instruments. Okay. So I would maybe stop here for now, and perhaps I overextended my time. Thank you, Mr. Citroën.
Thank you. As you represent the presidency, you have the right to extend your time. Just one thing, I was a bit surprised in your presentation when you said that there will be no rail projects in the recovery, the national recovery plans, but it will be in MFF, because we saw recently a publication from the Portuguese government which was extremely ambitious on rail for the next 10 years. But I understand that's a decision which has been taken. There's just one thing, but very quickly, could you say a few words about the initiative that the Portuguese presidency will take on the link to the European Rail of Rail in the next 5 months? Are there some special events that we have to take into consideration, even if it's a very difficult period and a lot of things will be virtual, but are there some specific points which are linked to what we said during this webinar?
Yes, so we are planning to have a kickoff event for European Year of Rail by the end of March, where we will invite most of the stakeholders to give presentations and to engage in a discussion. And on the next day, after the kickoff event, we will have the informal Ministers' Council, where we want to continue this broad discussion on the railway sector. And the results of our intention is for the results of this discussion to then be converted into council conclusions at the formal council in the end of June, I believe, June or July. I don't recall exactly right now. So this will be the main event surrounding the European Year of Rail. Of course, then there will be a number of other cultural and outreach events across the member states.
Thank you very much, Federico. Now we go to Matteo Mussini, who is a Strategy and Process Management Senior Advisor. So I think that you have some slides to show. And we saw yesterday in the press a press release from CR, which was extremely worrying. I'm sure that you will say a few words about this. So Matteo, you have the floor, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Philippe, for having this opportunity and participating to a panel of such distinguished guests. So thank you also to the other panelists on my behalf and on behalf of CER. Yes, I think that I really have the impression that we are me, CR, Unife, the other speakers are really on a common agenda, and apparently we left out of this panel the enemy, but that doesn't exist. That doesn't mean that the enemy doesn't exist. But certainly it's comforting that we share the same priority. If we move to the first slide, I tried to put there the list of what will be the main investment priorities according to us. I don't know whether you see question marks, but certainly those were not in the original version. In any case, there was bullet points. And as I said, the priorities are there and are shared and are clear. The TEN-T is going to be a huge dossier for the expansion of the network, but also with for when it comes to high speed, as mentioned also by Director Reuters. We certainly need a focus of investments when it comes to freight, and this is true for the necessary infrastructure for longer and heavier trains, and this is true for local freight networks, the so-called last mile, which is certainly not an easy problem to solve, in the sense that it's a matter of making sure that there is consistency between urban planning and rail infrastructure planning. So certainly a pending homework. Alternative fuel infrastructure is going to be also a priority for us, and of course it goes without saying digitalization and automation. 5G, that of course provides for the possibility of all the other technologies to actually work. And certainly a stress on ERTMS, on board and on track. We know that the pace at which ERTMS deployment has proceeded so far was not really the best ever and the fastest ever. We really have to find the possibility for a discontinuity in this space and accelerate deployment. And certainly digital automatic coupling, also something that was mentioned by Director Reuters in his presentation. Digital automatic coupling, it is certainly something on the side of the research and innovation and on the side of the deployment where we have to dedicate resources. If we move to the next slide, please. I cannot, of course, avoid to talk when it comes to rail investments to the impact that COVID had on the railway operating community. Figures are pretty clear and pretty shocking as well. In 2020, there was a loss of turnover of 25 billion for passengers and almost 2 billion for freight. This means minus 42% turnover compared to 2019 for passenger, minus 12 for freight. Certainly, we are thankful to the European Commission for establishing the temporary framework for state aid, for example, and other temporary measures that help the sector, let's say, make the best possible use of its own resilience. Certainly a reflection that will have to be done in the future when the pandemic is over. Not saying if the pandemic is over, because I'm a true believer that the pandemic must be over very soon, but certainly we will have to see what portions of this framework maybe have to be transformed into something more structural. If we want to go to the next slide. Yes, I mean, we all know the figures of the MFF. The final agreement is pretty close to the council position of last July. And yes, I mean, in a way or another, 60% of the MFF is theoretically accessible for rail projects. Not saying that is earmarked, of course, that would be a different word. But certainly is accessible in a way or another from the side of the green transition or the digital transition. This is the first element that is striking. The second element that is striking is that we are looking at the biggest ever budget line that has been proposed in an MFF, which is the Recovery and Resilience Facility. The weight, the dimension of this budget line changes the whole way in which advocacy for good investments will be done in the next future, in the sense that it really, since the facility will be disbursed to member states on the basis of national recovery plans, that hopefully will have a cross-border dimension. I most agree with that. But since these will be disbursed to member states and managed de facto by member state, although of course the assessment of the Commission and the green light of the Commission will be necessary, well, it means that national government will play a major role in shaping investment policy in the years to come. We can go to the next slide. I think it's important to underline how, when it comes to the Recovery and Resilience Facility, this has been mentioned by Mr. Riquet, if I remember well, 37% of the resources in each member state will have to be allocated to projects contributing to the green transition, and 20% to be allocated to projects distributing to the digital transition. Yet, I think there is a pending problem that is probably been referred to by Mr. Francisco. We go to the next slide, and this should be the message the one message I want to launch with the presentation. I remember that the beginning of the legislature, I was thinking, we as railways, probably we dedicate enough resources to explain the sustainability credential of railways, and now the whole thing is mature, everybody agrees, we have to move and talk about digitalization, automation, the sustainability thing is done. Well, this is not true. We realized that this is not true, that we have to insist on this topic. In the table that you see in front of you, you can see that when it comes to the Common Provision Regulation, the regulation that basically is over the usage of all the different European structural investment funds, the annex on climate tracking was assigning a coefficient of 100% to certain rail projects, but a 0% to other rail projects. And I'm reading there: reconstructed or improved railways, TEN-T core network, and then the same for the TEN-T comprehensive network for all those that are reconstructed or improved railways. 0% of contribution that was recognized to the achievement of the climate change objectives of the EU. Digitalization of transport was assigned 40%. ERTMS 0%. ERTMS 0%. So, and that was the proposal for the annex to the Common Provision Regulation. And then in November, a guidance was issued by the European Commission regarding the Recovery and Resilience Facility, suggesting member states to use the annex of the CPR for calculating the climate tracking of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. We wrote letters, we found a light, and I'm thankful, and I'm honestly thankful to many portions of the European Commission, to many DGs and many friends at the DGs that helped us in explaining that that thing had to be corrected. And then we came to the agreement on the RRF. We see that huge improvements have been done. Still, there is a 40% on ERTMS, where I thought that 100% was more correct. It's really to be argued why ERTMS contributes less to the achievement of climate change objectives than it is building new railways, when ERTMS increased capacity without occupying more land, for example. So we see a good improvement, and now we're waiting for the CPR trialogues to end and hopefully make sure that their annex is consistent with the annex to the RRF. So hopefully we get the job done all together, and thank.
We have an issue with Matteo. I think he will come back, but I think Matteo, we had a small issue with you. So could you finish your presentation and then could
absolutely. I don't know where you left me.
But we know that you were speaking about the climate tracking issue, and we're quite confident that in the trilogue that at least we will get the result of this, what we have in front of you in these slides. Yeah.
Thank you. We are confident of that, and but still, let's not forget that a proposal in this sense was made. A problem is there. We have to insist on the sustainability credentials of railways. I think that we can jump the last slide, Philippe, and I close myself here.
Okay, thank you very much, Matteo. You mentioned this very important topic on the coefficient. There's just one question, but you have only 2 minutes to answer. What is the view of the CR on the EU Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, which has been presented by Commissioner Vălean on the 10th of December? Do you have, could you say a word about the document and what you think, what CR think about it?
Thank you, Philippe, for the questions. That addresses another important front. We're certainly have a positive view of the strategy. It is built around the two concepts of green and digital transitions for mobility. This is translated into a underline everywhere in every single page is the need for multimodality. A concept that certainly we agree with, and because we think that within a multimodal system, rail can play a heavy role and really be the backbone of such a system. We agree with the ambitions, and I mentioned there the ambitions for high speed and freight. I think that we have to remember that this is not enough, that we also need to invest in a cultural change of the behavior of the consumers when making their transport modes. I hope the European Rule of Rail will also help on this, and that this exercise will not end with December 21.
Thank you very much, Matteo. So now we will finish with Marc-Robert Santaix, who is Executive Director of Mobility Finance at Siemens Mobility, who will present the view of Unifair and Siemens on this specific topic. So Marc, you have the floor. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Jean-Philippe. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, a very warm welcome from my side also to this UNIFE web forum and to the Year of Rail. So the European Union has given itself a massive historic budget of 1.8 trillion euros, of which 1.1 come from the MFF and the important and interim facility on the Recovery and Resilience Facility of 672.5 billion euros. So I'm honored to be here today to share some thoughts on how to boost investment in the rail transport using funds of the European Union. And I will attempt to add some flavor, obviously, from the rail supply side industry to this discussion. So naturally, investments with funding provided by European Union and corresponding member states have to support the political objectives of decarbonization and digitalization. We heard this in various prior proposals and discussions of my fellow panelists. And I did note the 5 policy objectives stated by Mr. Berkovich, which I found very interesting because rail fits perfectly. As most of you are very much aware, rail is already the most carbon efficient means of transport, as it accounts for only 0.4% of greenhouse gas emissions in the transport sector, while actually carrying 18% of inland freight and 8% of passengers within Europe, which obviously has to be increased. Rail should therefore be further supported to become the backbone of an environmental friendly transport infrastructure, as well as a key element within the digitalization strategy of the EU. As stated before by my fellow panelists, we also therefore welcome very much the Sustainable Smart Mobility strategy presented last December. That does certainly reinforce the Green Deal and sets the path for transport to become sustainable, smart, and resilient, while fortunately giving rail a very prominent role. My fellow panelists already noted some of the key pillars of the strategy, increasing freight rail by 50% in 2013 to 2030, and doubling it by 2050, doubling high-speed rail by 2030, which is again less than 10 years, and tripling it by 2050. And obviously completing the core network and the comprehensive networks by 2030 and 2050, respectively. Fortunately, rail is further highlighted by the Commission, stating that more cross-border, and this is a topic which has been popping up in this panel a couple times already. So cross-border projects will be needed to integrate all member states into one rail system, and to obviously smooth interconnections for cross-border rail transport within the European Union. So a lot to do, a lot of areas that enable us to boost investment in rail transport, be it in infrastructure or rolling stock, or to quote my fellow panelist, Mr. Ruitas, very big tasks ahead of us. So obviously one field which has been noted is obviously ERTMS, which increases capacity of existing infrastructure of up to 40%, enabling faster speeds, closer distances, achieves high reliability rates, and in the end also increases safety for passengers. And in our view, obviously, the completion of the core network should go hand in hand with the deployment of the ERTMS technology. Happy to see that the Commission sees, and I'm quoting, ERTMS to be the heart of the digital rail system. Obviously, we feel the same way. The construction and upgrading of electrified railway lines should remain the key focus, or the key focus on the core network. However, as also stated by my fellow panelists earlier, there might be situations where we have to enhance decarbonization of networks without electrification. So we have to understand that rolling stock powered by alternative fuels has to be seen and should be seen as a viable option. An investment option, by the way. 5G connectivity. I mean, this is one thing we don't only see in the rail infrastructure or rail industry. This is something across the board: factory automation, medical, energy. So this is something which combines basically all infrastructure or industrial sectors, if you so will. And in our case, it would obviously offer significant benefits to real-time train loads, things like traffic forecasting, video surveillance, automatic train operations, and obviously laying the ground for the future railway mobile communication system, so FRMCS. The topic of fleet replacement and fleet upgrades, I think, is also very important, as this also offers a considerable potential for energy savings and corresponding climate protection. We should take more advantage of alternative drive solutions based on hydrogen, battery, as well as dual and hybrid mode solutions. Here we believe that support in the form of environmental investment bonuses for the purchase of new rolling stock and or upgrading, retrofitting of existing trains could create the needed incentive. In the case of alternative fuels, obviously the corresponding, if you so will, charging or tank infrastructure will have to be put into place. This might be a playing field where energy, wind, rail, industrial base industry and rail have to cooperate maybe better, or maybe kind of find ways of interacting in a more comprehensive manner. Obviously, EU-linked and EU and member state funds should support and further enhance the global competitiveness of EU industry and essentially secure jobs within the European Union. My daughter is 15, and I'm sure she wants to be employed someday. This must obviously hold true for funds coming from the recovery and resilience facilities and the corresponding member state recovery programs. There have been many discussions also in these various panels within UNIFE, and I'm sure within, I know within Brussels and with CEF, of how to procure and evaluate projects in the rail transport industry. We believe that the application of the MEET principles, the most economic advantageous tender principle, should be the default approach in the rail transport sector, as this kind of removes the short-sightedness of buying the cheapest possible asset and takes into consideration, obviously, the longevity and long lifetime of rail transportation assets, as well as the complexity that these are projects and not selling bolts of pencils. In relation to the recovery facility, or the resilience recovery facility, we do see that obviously the funds have to be utilized by the end of 2026. That means that all project phases, and looking at our colleague from Portugal, so the identification, the development, the tendering, and the actual implementation having to be completed in 6 years seems to be a bit ambitious. However, we do believe that obviously if we have new projects, or maybe projects which can be quick wins and are completed by 2026, yes, of course, they received funding, but obviously projects which might reach certain sustainable or noticeable milestones should also be eligible for funding as well. At the same time, on national levels, obviously projects have to be fast-tracked. And I mean, what are projects which lend themselves to be fast-tracked? Those who have already gone through some of the project development stages, so maybe have already been identified, developed, and could be put out to tender quickly, and hopefully then implemented quickly by industry. One point we do want to make, obviously, and this kind of goes into the absorption rate of funding, as also in the past, that we do see that to really put assets on the ground, to put infrastructure on the ground, we have to make sure this will be a collaborative approach between EU entities, member states, and industry, obviously, to ensure that we have a high absorption rate or deployment of capital to be able to put on the ground what we intend to do within the next 10 to 30 years, so to speak. Regarding funding itself, obviously rail projects have been funded by grants, as well as via other financing and enhancement instruments. We have discussed, obviously, the Connecting Europe facility, the Euro structural and investment funds, and EFSI, which is now probably obviously part of the InvestEU program. And in future, at least for a shorter period of time, the RRF as well. The topic of blending we had discussed in various forums over the past years, and do believe that this is a good way to leverage private sector capital, to put monies into rail assets within the European Union. For example, obviously PPP transactions lend themselves to exactly blending public sector monies, be these grants or some other instruments, and private sector capital such as equity coming from sponsors or bank or institutional debt. However, we do see that these schemes take time, they're highly complex, and therefore we do believe that these approaches should be taken or applied on a very selective basis. I mean, look at projects, I'm not going to name any, also in the urban rail PPP area in Europe, they did take some time to go to tender, to implement. There may have been some discussions on and off balance sheet, on changes in maybe in scopes which are needed to accommodate the requirements of the public sector, and they simply take time. Therefore, we do believe that the grant funding instrument in the rail transport project should preferably be the preferred path, and this is especially true in cases where we have talking about quick recoveries of economies and quick implementation of projects. So concluding, I think we're all in agreement that rail is already the most carbon efficient means of transport and does support the main key objectives of the European Union, being decarbonization and digitalization. We therefore urge key investments to be in the areas of digital rail infrastructure and rolling stocks. And the investment decision should be guided by the MEET principle and not by the cheapest purchase price. Obviously, funding coming from the public sector, EU and member states has to support technology created and made in the European Union, strengthening our economies, creating jobs today as well as in the future. And in relation to the Recovery and Resilience Facility, I think we do very much follow Commissioner for Transport Valéan's appeal and ask member states to recognize the importance and the relevance of rail transport within their national plans to be submitted to the Commission by the end of April of this year. Okay. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Just 1 minute, because now we have to start the Q&A session.
Sure.
On your side, you have just 1 minute to answer. For an industry point of view, how could the Commission use EU investment policy as a leverage to incentivize green purchases that favor jobs in Europe?
Well, at the end, it does goes to the MEET discussion, and eventually, I mean, we're not talking about buy the cheapest, but we're basically putting qualified criteria around procurement. So topics such as, I don't know, digitalization, degree of digitalization, degree of decarbonization, the utilization of alternative fuels, maybe hybrid solutions, or maybe hybrid solutions in terms of electrification and alternative fuels. Okay. Things like whole life costing, taking into consideration value services after sales, to kind of also broaden the burden on public sector budgets, for example.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hopefully, thank you, everybody.
Now we are going to start, unless one of the speakers wants to say something, because a lot of important things have been said. Maybe I could tell you what are the questions you have received from the people who are participating in this webinar. So there are a lot of questions for Mr. Reuters and Mr. Berkowitz. There is one question asking about the status of Shift to Rail 2 and when can we expect first calls for proposals in 2021. There was a question mark, and then there is it would be good if there would be an answer on your site, so Reuters and Berkowitz, on the question and on the mention made by our Portuguese colleague about the fact that all the investment must be in the national recovery plans finished by 2026. How do you view things? Because this is extremely challenging. And then if we start by those questions, I would like also to ask a question. It's a bit complicated. How on recovery plans, what tools, how can we convince the member states to include rail in their recovery plans? So Mr. Reuters and Mr. Berkowitz, could you answer to those specific points, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Citroën. Happy to come in. On the shift to rail, the Commission will come forward very, very soon now with a single basic act, it is called, a proposal for going through the legislative procedure to put in place the joint undertakings, so to continue them. I therefore expect that the shift to rail could be up and running in the second half of 21. And the call could come either still at the end of 21 or the beginning of 22, to be determined, of course, through the procedure that is coming. So we hope, of course, still in 21. And with regard to the RRPs, the Recovery and Resilience Plans, I fully concur what our colleague from Portugal said. In fact, it's not so easy to use in case you have to complete the investments by 2026. And it therefore is logical what Portugal has been doing to focus money on those areas where this is not too difficult. And we have been putting forward the guidance from the Commission side and also indicated that, for instance, investments in recharging and refueling, or also in urban, could be areas in transport field which can be quickly absorbed and can be very useful for decarbonization. Now, I will make a point now towards rail, nevertheless, Mr. Citroën. In fact, what we are trying to seek with the member states is those projects which are already running could sometimes also benefit from a top-up from the RRF. So, for instance, if you look at all major projects like Brenner or Fehmarn or Rail Baltica or Lyon-Turin or any of those which are already under construction, but where we can from the CEF only allow ourselves to give a part of the budget needed, then a top-up by the RRF would be very welcome. Now, of course, I'm not going to go into the details of the Portuguese portfolio like Évora Mérida or Alta Beira line, but we will always be available to explore, because we think that there are many projects that are ongoing, Mr. Citroën, where we cannot provide all of the money from CEF, unfortunately, but where it would be useful to complement in order not to miss the 26th deadline.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Berkowitz. Do you want to add something to what Mr. Reuter said? Well, if not, okay. So,
yeah, so I can just, sorry, I just had a little glitch there. No, I think, I mean, as Harold said, I mean, the issue is to try and identify those investments which can be accelerated or upscaled. And I just quickly want to come back on the point on the climate change tracking, because I mean, it's still under discussion with the co-legislators, but I think it's going in the direction that you highlighted. And I think that the main point is that the ambition of the RRF is to deliver digital and green transition. And I think, you know, that railway sector offers something, and there are areas such as ERTMS, which we think, you know, it's perhaps easier to invest more quickly than, you know, construction of new lines.
Okay, thank you very much. But it is a very sensitive topic, and we would like to thank as well the European Parliament for the support they gave us on this important fact. Now, I would like to ask a question to Mr. Riquet concerning the CEF2. When do you expect that CEF2 could be operational? I know that the negotiation is not yet completely finalized, but when do you think that this CEF2 could be operational?
I can't just say that I hope, but I'm looking about Harold, which was smiling. We hope to finish in a few weeks. I hope so, and we make proposal of compromise about that. I think it's rather difficult discussion, and so I remain very prudent about our discussion today for that. But we can't have we can't avoid a success. It's mandatory for us. It's impossible to have something else. And so I hope that in a few weeks we will succeed and we will become operative about that. But it remains rather difficult. I want to underline something that during the last trialogue we have made progresses. I think it was new, and I think under Portugal's presidency it is new energy, a new spirit, and we are hoping that we could reach the success in a few weeks.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you for your support, Dominique. Thank you very much. So on my side, there's maybe a last question, because I don't that I would like. It's an open question, so I don't know who wants to answer to the question from a friend of mine. It's about rail investments in infrastructure require long-term efforts on OPEX and CAPEX. Is the EU funding toolbox well equipped to support this? Are decision makers confident on providing such long-term support, and how? I don't know if Mr. Reuters or Mr. Berkowitz could answer, or someone else, so because we have a lot of specialists on these topics, or we think about the answer, and I don't know if someone wants to say a few words about this question.
I can pick it up, maybe.
Okay.
Philippe.
Yeah.
Well, the European instruments, they only finance capex, right? They do not finance opex on this kind of investments. However, I believe regarding the long-term planning and the long-term effort, the TNT networks and the definition of the TNT core and the TNT comprehensive networks have been a crucial instrument in focusing the long-term priorities of the different countries, and not to spread investments around all across each country's projects. And still, it like Harald Reuters has commented, it still hasn't been able to create the European rail network. It still has numerous gaps across national borders, but it has certainly helped focus the investment in those corridors, and little by little, though, I believe those gaps will be filled.
Okay. Thank you very much for your answer. So unless one of the speakers wants to say something, but a lot of important things have been said on this during this meeting. I would like to thank you all for your inspiring contributions and this lively debate. But the clock is ticking, and it's unfortunately time to wrap up this event. It's clear that the importance of investing EU funds in rail projects will not only contribute to post-COVID economic recovery, but also to a greener and more digital EU future. If we want the EU to achieve its ambition targets, we need to make our transport system more sustainable with rail at its backbone. The EU can count on the rail stakeholder community to deliver on these plans. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us here today, and please stay tuned for the next UNIFE webinar, which will take place in the framework of the EU Rail of Rail. It will be, as it is, you can see it on the slide, it will be on Green Deal and energy efficiency. It will be during the month of, at the end of the month of February. We'll give the date later on. So I would like to thank you, and I hope to see you again soon in person. And really thank you all, and to especially to the speakers for the time they spent with us, and for the very important political and economic messages that have been transmitted by them during this meeting. So thank you very much, and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.